It's time for another episode of the Alphabet Tag series, a series where I answer a lot of book-related questions relating to a particular letter of the alphabet. We are now on to the letter M. I did actually record a version of this video a few days ago, but I had a very sore throat. It sounded awful, so I'm actually doing this for the second time. So it may seem a little bit rehearsed, but hopefully I'm able to make it seem like it's off the cuff in the usual way. M is for, finish this sentence with your favourite M-named author. It's going to be a bit of a cliche, but it's going to have to be Melville for me. I read Moby Dick, or rather listened to it, several years ago now, and I was completely blown away by the book. I thought it was fantastic. Even the bits that are allegedly really boring, where he just bangs on about whaling for ages, I still found those bits riveting. And I have no idea why, because I wasn't expecting to. I wasn't expecting to like this book at all. I thought it would be really dry. I thought that it was just going to be some kind of adventure novel, and those kinds of novels don't interest me. Never that interested in seafaring novels either. But the way the book is written, the characters, the plot, especially in that run-up to the whale and the attack towards the end, that whole sequence is some of the best writing I've ever come across, but the whole thing is also just amazing. Also, Moby Dick is such a bizarrely written book. I was expecting a conventional story, but it is quite experimental in the way that it's written, in the perspectives that it takes. It does all kinds of weird things that I just wasn't expecting this novel to do. It's definitely a book I need to reread too. I'm surprised that I haven't, and it has been a while since I've done a reader's guide on the channel, and I think Moby Dick is one of those books where I don't know if I'm ready to tackle it yet, but one day I'd like to give it its own reader's guide, because I could make a lot of episodes about Moby Dick. M is for magic system. What are your favourite magic systems in literature? I adore the magic system from The Wheel of Time. I think in terms of modern magic systems, where it's very explained, it's very detailed, it's what people might call the hard magic system, it's one of the best, if not the best, that I've come across. Not only do I like the gendered nature of it, the way it combines elements of West and Eastern philosophy from around the world, all that stuff, and the way it combines that by integrating the magic system itself into the plot, because The Wheel of Time is a novel about gender conflict, and that's baked into the magic system, into the world, into the characters, into the individual arcs that some of these characters have as well. Oftentimes, magic systems in fantasy books come across as ornamentation. They're just there because authors feel like they have to create them, and they're sort of fun and interesting, but they don't do much, they're just this little affectation. Or they can just solve, plot conveniences and things like that. But that's fine to a point, but it's nice when you get a magic system that integrates itself into the story as well as the magic system in The Wheel of Time does. I've even made a couple of videos talking about the magic system and why I think it's such an effective one in terms of the way that it integrates itself with the plot. So if you want to hear my thoughts a little bit more, I'd definitely go and watch one of those videos. Another magic system that is pretty loose that I enjoy is the magic system from the Chronicles of Narnia. Yes, it does have that Christianity baked in there, but it's also got a lot of original stuff, especially in the first book, chronologically speaking, The Magician's Nephew, where you have the uncle creating these rings which take people to different dimensions, and you have all of these pools which take people to different places. You then learn the history of Charn, the place where the White Witch is from, the deplorable word, all of this stuff. It's not something that's as fleshed out and detailed as the magic system in a lot of modern fantasy books. It's what you might call a soft magic system, but nevertheless, it's a fascinating one. And in fact, by not explaining everything, that keeps an aura of mystery around the magic system, and it's one of the reasons why I enjoy the Chronicles of Narnia as much as I do. M is for murder mystery. What murder mystery novels are your favourite? Have to say, I don't usually read murder mystery novels that often. Not because I dislike the genre for any strong reasons, it's just not a genre that appeals to me in any strong way. I've never felt the urge to read a detective fiction. I have the Sherlock Holmes books on my shelf, and I know I should touch them and read them, but I just haven't. Maybe I will at some point. When I was younger, I do remember reading a few detective books. There was a novelist called Mo Hader. I can't remember anything about those books now, although I did enjoy them at the time. They're probably what, would be considered to be trashy maybe, but that's fine. I don't mind reading trashy books every now and then. But, those are some books that I read. I also think I read a Martina Cole book when I was younger as well. Those are the only things that come to mind. I really like Agatha Christie's the adaptations of Agatha Christie's works, but I've never actually read one of her novels. A few of my friends have recently and told me that they're really good and I should. And I will, I'm sure I will, I just haven't got round to it yet. Maybe I'll give Agatha Christie a go, because probably of the famous detective writers, she's the one that grips me more. I was never that much of a fan of Sherlock Holmes, so maybe I should start there. If you do read detective fiction though, let me know down in the comments, what detective fiction do you like, and why do you like the genre itself as well? It'd be good to get your thoughts on that. M is for Martin. What do you think of A Song of Ice and Fire? And did you like the TV show? In some ways, Martin is a combination of the best and the worst of modern fantasy writing. Mostly the best. The fact that A Song of Ice and Fire represents a complete break from the tradition of fantasy writing, Tolkien's fantasy writing and legacy, that has kind of had a stronghold over fantasy writing for decades. Martin really is a break from that. He comes across sometimes as more of a historical writer rather than a fantasy writer, partly because magic is in his world, but it takes a back seat. There's a big focus on politics, intrigue, and all of those kinds of things, and that makes his work stand out. There's also a big focus on character as well, which in fantasy, oftentimes, while you can have great characters, the focus can more be on the plot, on the world building, so that characters can sometimes feel a little bit constrained, put on the back seat as the author tries to balance these other things. Martin manages to have some very complicated world building, complex political stuff, but also some great characters as well. Some of his characters are my favourite fantasy characters of all time. He also does a great job of subverting a lot of classical fantasy tropes, and he does this intelligently, not stupidly, like we see in the later seasons of the TV show, unfortunately. But, as I said, he also represents something that I think is becoming a problem with, I think, modern fantasy writing, although maybe it does go back. Let me know if you think it does. But it's where novelists feel the need to have these series that go on and on, that are incredibly long, have these incredibly complicated worlds, which are interesting, but I think sometimes novelists can lose themselves in these worlds. This certainly happened with, Robert Jordan, who wrote The Wheel of Time, although that series did eventually get finished. But that also series went on for way too long. It didn't need to be as long as it was. And I think that this is the problem with modern fantasy writing, is this overindulgence maybe in one's world to the point where people aren't finishing books anymore. And I do think that is a problem, because I think that as a writer you should complete things. And for me as a reader, I've just decided that pretty much unless a novelist has finished a series or they have a proven track record of finishing things, I'm just disinclined to read their works, because at the end of the day, fantasy books are quite an undertaking. They're incredibly long, individually, let alone as a series, and so I'm just not willing to engage as much with long series where I don't think they're going to be finished. I have read the first 4 books of A Song of Ice and Fire, absolutely loved them, but I just don't know if I will carry on, because I don't know if Martin will finish them. If he does, or if someone else does, then great, I will definitely read them, because I do think, as I said, it's some of the best writing out there in fantasy literature. As for the TV show, I have a pretty conventional opinion on it, I think. It was great for the first 6 seasons. Last 2 seasons were a bit of a travesty for many reasons, which I won't go into because I think we've all heard them and we all know them. One thing that I will say, though, is that I didn't actually mind certain things at the end. I didn't mind Bran, for example, being on the throne, because in a way it sort of made sense that could happen, and maybe, with the right kind of setup, it could have been okay. The issue was, it just wasn't set up at all, because Bran basically stopped being a character after the 3rd season, when they basically lost interest in him and didn't do anything with him and turned him into this vacuum, which made sense because he had the Raven and all of that, but I think it just didn't work because it was rushed and he didn't have any characterization to make it interesting. Likewise, Daenerys going mad, I mean, in the books, she does come across as a little bit more insane than she did in the show, but it could have also been set up really well. If you'd have had a whole season, say, on the Night King and dealing with that, a whole season on dealing with Cersei and watching Daenerys go mad towards the end of that season and ultimately flipping and defeating Cersei, and then having the series of the Mad Queen, I think that would have been great. I think that would have been compelling, watching. It would have subverted the saviour trope, which is what Daenerys basically was, and all that stuff. It just needed more time, and I think that's ultimately what the problem with the show was. It wasn't so much the things that were happening, it was the complete lack of time given to let these things gestate, which, if you think about how slow the first few seasons of Game of Thrones was, it was just a complete shock. It was not a fast-paced show, and for it to suddenly become that in a way that just destroyed characterization was a real big shame. And again, it's probably not a series I will rewatch for that reason, because I know where it's going and it's not going anywhere good, so why would I? M is for Murdoch. Have you read any novels by Iris Murdoch? Which are your favourites? I've read a couple of Iris Murdoch books. For those of you who don't know, she's a British novelist from the 20th century, and I've read a fair bit of her philosophy as well for my job, because I am a philosopher, and I have to say I prefer her philosophy to her novels. Murdoch is witty, she's incisive, and her novels are very easy to read, and they do have interesting things to say, but her books just don't grab me in any strong way. She writes in a tradition of very sort of social realism, which is not a tradition that I typically enjoy. Although I can enjoy social novels from the likes of Forster, from, Jane Austen and Dickens, to me, those novelists have a little bit of magic to them, whether it's the theatricality of Dickens, the ridiculous parody and wit that you see in Austen, or the sort of strange magical atmosphere of Forster that comes out, even in his very conventionally sounding novels. Murdoch sort of lacks this. She lacks that magic to really rope me in. And I think that ultimately this is a matter of taste. I don't think it makes her a bad novelist, but I've never been one for dry social novels. I find them quite dull. I need something else, because to me, it's somewhat, I don't know, it's just not that interesting to me to read about ordinary life in a mundane way, and I've just felt that most of Murdoch's novels, or at least the few that I've read, have come across that way. So she's not a novelist for me, but I'd recommend, if you haven't read her work, trying it out, because she, like I say, she can be quite witty, she can be quite fun, and a lot of other people who I know who have read Murdoch's novels have enjoyed them. Also, if you are interested in her philosophy, I'd recommend watching an interview with her that you can get on YouTube. It's with a philosopher called Brian McGee. He interviews a lot of philosophers on this old TV show, and she says they have a lot of interesting things to say to each other. So I'd recommend that, and also maybe reading some of her philosophical papers if you're interested in that stuff too. M is for Magic Realism. What are your favourite books in Magic Realism? A few names come to mind. Angela Carter, obviously. A guy called Boris Vian, who you may not have heard of, but he wrote a very interesting magical realist book that I read a while ago. I can't remember the title. I just know it was so weird and strange. And I can't even really remember much of the plot. I can just remember a certain colour scheme and certain weird flashing images. I don't even know if they're necessarily from the book. I just associate it with this colour scheme and these images. And so that was a very interesting book. You should definitely have a look. It was quite hard to get hold of as well, because it was a suggestion of a friend of mine. We read this book on her recommendation, and then we talked about it. And so, I don't remember all that much about it, aside from it was hard to get, and it conjured up some very weird images in my head. There's also Murakami, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I really enjoyed that book. And the most recent magical realist novel that I read, Master and Margarita, a complete classic. Amazing book. If you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend. But for me, ultimately, it's going to be Angela Carter. I've read all of her books. I've talked about them at length on this channel. And she pretty much covers the full gamut of what magical realism can be. If you want something a little bit more conventional, although that doesn't mean much here, you should read Wise Children, the book about these theatrical sisters who are very old, have seen it all, and have a very complicated and perverted family life, but they tell it with, a lot of flair, and it's all ridiculous and campy. I'd recommend that one. If you want what's probably Angela Carter's best work, though, definitely try Nights at the Circus, this Victorian novel that sort of is Dickens, but sexed up and psychedelic and completely off the wall. I would definitely recommend that. Or if you just want to push your limits and really go there, you should try The Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Hoffman, which combines a parody of postmodern literature with science fiction and fantasy, and all of it just wrapped up in this absolutely crazy package. Wouldn't recommend it as a first Carter novel, because it can be quite hard and difficult at some times, but if you read a couple of her books and you want to push yourself, definitely recommend that novel. Or if you're just used to postmodern fiction, I think you could definitely give Desire Machines a try, and you wouldn't bat an eyelid. All excellent novels, definitely my favourite magical realist writer. Of course, another big name in this genre is Salman Rushdie, and I have to say, I was in a book club and we chose this book, and this book killed that book club. So that's all I will say about Rushdie, although I still want to give Midnight's Children a go. M is for must read. What is the book you feel you must read? Well, there are so many books that I feel like I must read. I'm going to stick with one author and his books because I feel like he's a complete blank spot in my reading that I need to fill, and still don't really have an inclination to do in the immediate future, but I think I will eventually, and that is Leo Tolstoy. I've read Dostoevsky. I should really read Tolstoy. You know, those two are kind of usually pitted against each other. And I think what it comes down to is that, obviously I know Tolstoy's novels, War and Peace, Anna Karenina especially, but I also know him philosophically as the arch moralist. If you do an undergrad course in aesthetics, or if you teach one, you will hear about Tolstoy and his moralistic view of novel writing. And if you know me on this channel, you know that I don't conform to that school. I think it's a dead end for writing. I think it limits creativity. I just don't think it's a good philosophy of literature and the arts in general. Nevertheless, I associate Tolstoy with this, and I associate his novels with this view, and I think that might be what's maybe subconsciously putting me off trying his novels. Although I do know and have read that although he had this view, he doesn't actually live up to it in his novels. So I really should give him a try. It's just, I know his novels are quite big and intimidating. There's the moralism on top of it, and so it just puts me off. But I'm sure I'll get there someday in the future. M is for mythology. What are your favourite myths? I was fascinated by quite a few myths when I was younger. Two of them, one from Greek mythology and one from Egyptian mythology, spring to mind the most. On the Greek side, we have the Medusa myth. I remember my grandparents used to tape on video old, shows and films, and they had a whole library of these taped things, and I would watch them. And one of them was a taped film of, I think it was several Greek myths, probably from the 50s or 60s, thinking about the special effects and obviously the time. And they had this bit with Medusa in, and it scared me, but in a way that I liked. I was quite timid as a kid when it came to horror things, but this was kind of a good scare rather than a bad scare. And just the whole story then inspired one of my first things that I wrote, which was when I was about 10. The first proper book that I wrote, I suppose. I'd written little things before then, but this was a story about two Greek, a brother and sister, and they were sort of prophesized to destroy not only Medusa, but a Hydra, the seven-headed lizard thing. And so they go off on this quest to do this. I think initially there was an attack on their village, typical sort of standard stuff, nothing crazy original from 10-year-old Josh there. But they go on this quest. There are different chapters where they confront different kinds of creatures, and eventually they kill the Medusa, they kill the Hydra, and they save the day, and it's all woo-doo-hoo. So that was probably, in terms of inspiring me, one of the most inspirational myths. I was also very fascinated with Egyptian mythology when I was younger as well, and especially Osiris and, of course, his sister Isis, and the story of him being murdered, I believe, by Seth. He gets chopped up into little bits, and then Isis has him put back together, and he becomes the king of the underworld and all of that stuff. It's so gruesome, but also just such a creepy but a compelling story that I actually went to a party dressed as Osiris back when I was maybe a bit older, just because like I said, I've always been inspired by Egyptian mythology in general. It's such a strange religious tradition, the combination of sort of animals with sort of the gods. It's this weird hodgepodge of different styles of stuff, and I just find that really interesting. So much so that I even have a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, an illustrated version that tells you the story of this person who's going on this journey through the afterlife. I just find that stuff really interesting. Of course, I don't believe any of it, but these myths are really inspiring, and they're the foundations of so many cultures, and so no wonder then that they inspire so many stories from me, but also from others as well. M is for masculinity. What is your favourite novel about masculinity? I think it's a toss-up, and maybe a tie actually, between Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence and Morris by E.M. Forster. Now, people might think that Morris can't be about masculinity because it's just a gay romance novel. However, I think that makes it perfectly suited to being a novel about masculinity, because it's a novel in which the protagonist, Morris, has to find a way to reconcile his masculinity with his sexuality. Typically, these two things are seen as in conflict with each other. Even many gay writers tend to pit these two things against each other as if you can only be one thing and not the other, which I find kind of annoying. I like the fusion of both, the integration of both. I think that's really important and healthy for men to be able to integrate their masculinity into their sexuality, whatever that happens to be. And so I like Maurice for that reason. It's a story that is about many things, but it's also about that. And I think that it's a novel that you can benefit from whether you're gay or not. I think it's worth reading to explore those ideas. It also gives you lots of different styles of gay masculinity in its three main characters. You have Maurice, who's the most conventional, sort of middle-class boy. You have the more working class, Scudder. You also have Clive, who's a little bit more effete, and then the way more effete character of Risley, who's sort of based upon Oscar Wilde, I believe. So lots of different kinds of homosexuality merging with masculinity in different ways. And I find the book very fascinating for those reasons and others. When it comes to D.H. Lawrence and Sons and Lovers, I think there's just an archetypal story of a boy growing up in this novel that I think most boys can relate to. The sort of struggle with the father figure, the overbearing relationship with the mother, trying to break out from both of them, and having that, obviously it's a novel, so it's more theatrical and over the top and Freudian. I'm not saying that every boy has a Freudian relationship with his parents, but I think it is a novel that I think a lot of boys can relate to growing up. It's certainly one that I found I could relate to. And I think that Lawrence does such a good job of capturing this struggle of trying to be your own man, trying to be independent, and break from these family ties, which can actually be quite destructive as your parents either become antagonistics, trying to thwart you, or try to smother you and sort of live through you, both of which are, bad in their different ways. I also think that Lawrence just has a great masculine prose style in the way that he writes. It's hard to say exactly why, but if you read certain novelists or you listen to poetry, you can sometimes detect a sort of gender in the way that they speak. Not always. Some people can be quite androgynous in the way that they write, but I think Lawrence is someone who is quite masculine in the way he puts himself forward, which is probably why people like Simone de Beauvoir and her acolytes dislike him, which makes me like him all the more. Nevertheless, I would say Lawrence and Forster with these two books, giving us very different kinds of novels about masculinity, but novels that are worth reading. Alright, that is it for this episode of the Alphabet Tag. Let me know down in the comments how you would answer any of these questions. Otherwise, take care everyone. Ta-ra!